People have been curious about Stigmata since the beginning of Honkai Impact 3rd. What are they? How do they work? How do people get them? Why are they so hot? What was in Hoyo's mind when they designed the Hana set? Now that we are learning more about Project Stigma, it is suggested that Stigmata are much more important than we initially thought. Because of that, I came up with a theory that finally solves the mystery behind Stigmata and why are they so important. If you're curious, keep watching cause I'm about to blow your mind. Also, before I begin, stigma equals 1, stigmata equals multiple. There you go, you're welcome. Stigmata are a product of the previous era's biotechnology. They are engraved into the DNA of every human in the current era, and they manifest in the form of a tattoo-like marking on the bodies of those who have them. Their purpose is to improve the wielder's control over Honkai energy and increase their Honkai adaptability. As time passed, the stigma gene inside humans has diluted and very few are capable of awakening it. Not only that, but the majority of people would die if they were to get one because their body wouldn't be able to handle the Honkai energy. In real life, the word stigma can have two different meanings. A stigma is usually a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or a person. It's a symbol of shame and dishonor. Think of it how slaves used to be branded in the past to strip them away of their human status. When you think of stigmata in this context, the game becomes pretty disturbing. The other meaning comes from Christianity. Stigmata are marks corresponding to those of Jesus Christ's body when he was crucified. The most common representation is in the form of the nail marks in the palm of his hand. The same marks appeared on the bodies of various saints in Christianity, and they are said to be a mark of divine favor. If I were to draw a line between the stigmata in Honkai Impact 3rd and their meaning in real life, I think that the Honkai devs were more inspired by their depiction in Christianity, but you can make an argument for both. A mark of shame put on the Valkyries to symbolize that they are not humans anymore, just some weapons meant to fight the Honkai, and also a divine blessing, granting those who awaken them power beyond imagination. Stigma also represents a connection with God or a higher being. In the context of Honkai Impact 3rd, that God is the imaginary tree itself. There are 3 types of stigmata. The direct translation for the first type would be legendary stigmata, but that sounds really stupid, so I'm gonna call them Herrscher stigmata or true stigmata. These are the original stigmata that form on the body of a Herrscher. Yes, in case you didn't know, a Herrscher has both a core and a stigma. If the core is the faucet through which the Honkai energy is brought from imaginary space to reality, a Herrscher stigma is believed to be the tool that lets them control it. After capturing and studying the stigma on the bodies of multiple Herrschers, Mobius came up with the prototype for what we now call natural stigmata. This prototype was later perfected by Dr. May. Natural stigmata can manifest in multiple ways. They can awaken in only one individual, like we've seen with Adam, Li Sushang, or even Cele to some extent. Her case is a bit more complicated. She technically has the stigma of the Herrscher of Death, but she's not a Herrscher. So she basically has a Herrscher stigma that symbolizes that she has been chosen to become a Herrscher, but the Gem of Serenity, which is the core for the Herrscher of Death, is inside Kiana. So yeah. Anyway, we've also seen that natural stigmata can be passed down through bloodline, like the Kaslana family stigma. Even though all Kaslanas are able to use it to some extent, we've only seen one instance in which the stigma has fully awakened, and that is with Durandal. The last type are the artificial stigmata. They were developed by Schicksal in the current era in an attempt to copy and mass produce the effects of natural stigmata. Artificial stigmata are way less effective and are used by Valkyries with lower Honkai adaptability to improve their control over Honkai energy and let them fight. They have many negative effects on the body as they greatly reduce the lifespan of those who have them. Himeko is a great example of someone that used artificial stigmata to fight. The reason why they are so ineffective is because they are basically a copy of a copy, since natural stigmata are just a copy of the harsher stigmata. Hey, I want to remind you that just like how stigmata can manifest on people's bodies in Honkai Impact 3rd, you can also manifest more of my future videos on your timeline by hitting that subscribe button and giving this video a thumbs up. With the dawn of the final arc of part 1, some crazy revelations are implied with how Project Stigma operates and the philosophical analogies used by the characters to describe various concepts. One such analogy is Plato's cave. I guess that in the context of the game is Mobius's cave, since she brought it up way before Plato existed. This thought experiment goes like this. Imagine a couple of people locked up in a cave. Behind them, there is a fire. The people cannot turn back to look at the fire, but they can see the shadows cast by different people and objects that pass in front of the fire. Their entire reality is represented by the shadows cast on the wall. They are unaware of the true forms of the objects and the people from the other side. One of the many interpretations of this thought experiment is that our reality is just a shadow projected on a wall. Our individual consciousness is just a projection of a true reality that exists on a higher dimension. This leads us to another philosophical theory from Mobius, the theory of forms. If you played chapter 31 EX, you might recognize this word. It is brought up by the Wheel of Stigma to refer to people that have awakened their stigma, like Durandal. The Wheel of Stigma tells us that forms are the opposite of harshers. The word may seem very weird at a first glance, but if you understand the philosophical meaning behind it, it makes a lot of sense. According to Plato, a form represents an ideal state of a concept. He believed that forms should be used as a reference for everything, and that only by striving to achieve an ideal we can grow as human beings. This is why stigma awakened are called forms. They represent an ideal of humanity. A human that awakened their stigma has complete control over the flow of Honkai energy in their body. They are basically perfect humans that can live in harmony with the Honkai, and the regular humans are just a shadow cast on the wall. So, how are Stigma awakened capable of controlling the flow of Honkai energy inside their bodies? How does a Stigma work? Well, in order to understand this, we need to tackle the concept of imaginary numbers. Imaginary numbers are used in math to solve complex equations and are represented by the letter I. They were thought unapplicable in physics since, unlike math, physics deals with the real world. That is, unless you apply them to quantum physics. In quantum physics, there is a process called quantum entanglement. If two subatomic particles are entangled, that means that they will always move in opposite directions, no matter where they are situated in space. If, hypothetically, you take the two particles and bring them to opposite corners of the universe, that would still apply. Using classic physics, that would be impossible because we know that nothing is faster in the universe than the speed of light. So the particles wouldn't be able to communicate their position to each other because they are light years apart. But with the help of quantum physics, this suddenly becomes possible. It is believed that for the two particles to be able to communicate under those conditions, they must exist in a higher dimension as a single entity. And this higher dimension is called an imaginary space. Imaginary spaces are how imaginary numbers are translated from math to physics. They are spaces that we have no idea about, but we know that they must exist somewhere beyond our own world for the quantum entanglement to make any sense. And, as you might have guessed, this theory is the foundation of the imaginary tree in the Honkai universe. It also coincides with what Ado said during the Colosten arc, that for us, the only way to perceive the imaginary tree is through the passage of time, but in a higher dimension, the concept of time doesn't exist, and that's why two objects in quantum entanglement can communicate with each other instantly even if they are many light years apart. This tie, again, with another theory brought up by Dr. May. Understanding these theories and philosophical processes is important for Stigmata to make sense. After all, Honkai is just a mess of quantum physics and pseudoscience that blends together and creates an even bigger mess. According to quantum physics, the reality we perceive is just a byproduct of consciousness. Think about it this way. Let's say that somewhere in a remote forest with nobody around, a tree falls down and makes a strong noise. If there is nobody to hear the sound, did it actually exist? So, if reality is a byproduct of our own consciousness, then why does every single individual perceive reality in the same way? There are billions of us. Surely there are bound to be differences. And here's where the common soul theory comes into place. According to this theory, we perceive reality in the same way because, like the two subatomic particles that are entangled, we all exist as a single consciousness in a higher dimension. This means that our individual awareness is just a byproduct of a universal consciousness that is projected on a lower dimension. In a philosophical sense, you can say that humans are the imaginary tree itself. All this time we were fighting the Honkai, but we never realized that we are the Honkai. Okay, joking aside, you can see how all the quantum physics and philosophy kinda blends together into a single point. And that point are the stigmata. So, here is how my theory goes. The concept of dreams, consciousness, and imaginary space are the same thing in quantum physics. The true form of a stigma is what we call a stigma space, which exists in imaginary space. This has been confirmed in chapter 28 when Durandal entered the Kaslana stigmata space by being thrown into imaginary space. My theory is that stigmata are a projection of the stigma space in a lower dimension in the form of the marks on people's bodies. An observation made by the false Arrow during chapter 31 EX was that Honkai thinks in dreams, meaning that Honkai thinks in spaces similar to stigma spaces. I believe that stigmata are a technology meant to emulate Honkai's way of thinking. Of course, thinking in this case doesn't refer to literal thinking as you do right now, trying to understand this mess of a video. It's more like saying that Honkai can use imaginary space to project itself on our reality however it wants. That's why Herschers can bend physical laws, because Honkai doesn't follow the classic physics of our world, but it can create its own set of laws through dreams. That's also why Teresa can devour dreams with Vishnu's powers. Vishnu can devour Honkai, and the dreams that people were put into during Project Stigma function in a similar manner to Honkai. So, essentially, by creating Stigmata, Mobius and Dr. May reverse engineered the Honkai, allowing humans to access and control it through stigma spaces, which is basically a reverse projection of human consciousness on the imaginary tree. Does it make sense? Since stigma is a representation of consciousness on a higher dimension, it can also form an ideal version of a person as a stigma. An example of this is Veliona, an entity born from Cele Stigma. As I studied more and more about quantum physics, I'm pretty sure that Veliona is not the previous era Hersher of Death as many would think, but a projection of a perfect Zele from the Stigmata space. Since Ele had a strong desire for protection, and because she was a Stigma awakened, an ideal version of her that can protect herself was projected from her Stigma and took the form of Veliona. Then we have the Wheel of the Caslana Stigma, who took the appearance of Kevin. It is important to note that the Wheel of Stigma is a manifestation of the entire Caslana bloodline collective unconsciousness, not just Kevin. It took Kevin's form because, well, he is the most prominent figure in the bloodline and the biggest influence over the space itself. But the Wheel of Stigma could take many other forms, as we see in chapter 28. It seems that the aim of Project Stigma is to create Stigma versions of people and then use the basic principle behind imaginary renormalization to swap them with people in the real world. You remember imaginary renormalization, right? I talked about it in a previous video about the imaginary tree. Basically, it's a type of space distortion that lets you swap reality with imaginary space. I don't really know how Word Serpent can pull it off at such a large scale, since from all we knew, only the Hersher of the Void was able to do so, but it seems to have something to do with Hair's powers. Since the Stigma space and reality will basically swap places, and humans will be swapped with their Stigma versions, Honkai will naturally exist everywhere and in everybody, rendering the Hersher of Finality incapable of manifesting anymore. But I will go into more details about Project Stigma in my next video. I believe that understanding how Stigmata work is very important for the future of the plot. It's clear that Hoyo really likes to explore the realm of consciousness, aka the imaginary tree, in their games. Stigmata could give us a better understanding on the basics on which other Hoyo games, like Genshin and Honkai Star Rail, operate. What is Teyvat? Why are imaginary spaces, aka dreams, so important? Is Irminsul some kind of supercomputer from a higher dimension that can project data through imaginary spaces and create a false reality? And don't get me started on Star Rail. This could also help us better understand eons, which are essentially forms of consciousness that exist or ascended to a higher dimension and are projected into Honkai Star Rail's worlds through their paths. This is low-key the first instance in which Hoyo confirms that Honkai can literally be anything and that the form that we see in Honkai Impact 3rd is just one of many iterations it can take to these dreams that are later projected into different realities in lower dimensions.